Algebra 2, Common Core, solving rational word problems. Ben can paint a fence in 8 hours. Caleb can paint the same fence in 4 hours. Working together, how long would it take them to paint the fence? So these are called rational word problems because they're best solved by creating rational expressions, fractions, and working with those. Um, for these particular questions, I'd always talk about some sort of task and how a rate at which a task can be completed. It's helpful to think of creating a ratio of task over time. So task over time is a useful way to think about this because I want to. Ben can paint a fence in 8 hours. Caleb can do it in 4. Caleb is quicker than Ben. But comparatively, what are their rates? And if I add those rates together, that's going to be their combined rate. So that's really what we need to figure out is how to express them in a way of adding their rates to it. So working together, think of that as adding the rates together, adding rates, working together. So Ben's rate is that he could paint a fence in 8 hours. So that would be the task is to paint one fence, and he can complete that task in 8 hours. So we want to think of Ben's rate as 1 over 8. And Caleb's rate, well, he could paint one fence in 4 hours. So he could complete the one task in 4 hours. So Caleb's rate is 1/4. And the closer this is to, I guess, 1 over 1, that would be the faster. So 1/4 is faster than 1/8, comparatively. But if I add these rates together, that would be 1/8 plus 1/4. And what is 1/8 plus 1/4? Well, you can use a calculator, but we could do this without calculators. Common denominator would be 8, so I can multiply this by 2 over 2 and make it 2 over 8. 2 over 8 plus 1 over 8 equals 3 over 8. So that's not too bad, but then we have to realize, what does this answer mean? I want to know how long is it going to take them to complete this job. The answer is 3 over 8. What does that mean? Well, we have to remember what we said this is, that this is task over time. For Ben, that's one fence, 8 hours. Caleb, that's one fence, 4 hours. So this answer of 3 over 8 really translates to 3 fences in 8 hours. So that's their rate, is 3 fences, 8 hours. But does that really answer the question? I want to know how long is it going to take them to paint the one fence. So what you do after you add these together is you need to create a proportion. I don't want 3 fences, I want 1 fence. How long is it going to take? How many hours? So if you set it up like that, we can cross multiply here because it's a proportion. We get 3x equals 8 divided by 3. X equals 8 divided by 3. Now, in our calculator, when we type 8 divided by 3, it's going to give us the decimal answer of 2.6 repeating. So 2.6 repeating. But what is that answer? Still, what does that mean? 2.6 repeating. If a carpenter said, I'll get the job in 2.6 repeating hours, that sounds kind of weird, right? Well, the 2 in the front, I know that represents 2 hours. But what does the 0.6 repeating represent? Well, 0.6 repeating is 2/3. And 0.1 repeating is 1/3, 0.6 repeating is 2/3, and so on. And so if I take that 0.6 repeating and multiply it by the 60 minutes that I know make up an hour, I get 40 minutes. So if you have a decimal here, multiply that by your 60 minutes, and that'll tell you how many minutes you need. So this is really 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's the answer to it. So these questions have a couple of steps to it. A, turning each into its own rate, adding the rates together, but then that's only really half the problem. 3/8 is really a weird answer, so I have to translate that into an answer of how long would it take to paint one fence, and we get 2.6 repeating. But then what is that really in terms of hours and minutes? So take your decimal and multiply it by 40. So if you get a decimal of 0.5, that corresponds to 30 minutes. If you get a decimal, different things. Like, so if I had an answer of, say, like 2.7, Well, I could just take that point 0.7, let me get rid of that, the point 0.7, multiply it by 60, and that's going to give me 42 minutes. So you might have to do that. All right, here's an extension to this question. If Katie comes and helps Ben and Caleb, and the three of them can finish the job in 2 hours, how long would it take Katie if she was working by herself? So I know that Ben plus Caleb is 2 hours 40 minutes. But let's think of it as rates again. Let's go back to the 3/8. Ben by himself is a rate of 1/8. Caleb by himself is a rate of 1/4. Katie's rate, we don't know. That's really the question. But I know that all three working together, that Katie plus Ben plus Caleb has a rate of 2 hours, which is one task, 2 hours. And we know Ben and Caleb's rates, so I can think of this as K plus 1/8 for Ben, 1/4 for Caleb, and all three of these rates combined give us a rate of 1/2. One fence, one job in 2 hours. Simplify this out. We can write it as K plus, well, I know an eighth plus a fourth is 3/8 equals 1/2. And then if I subtract that 3/8 over, minus 3/8, and 1/2 minus 3/8, well, I could think of 3/8 as 4/8, right? And I get 1/8. So Katie's rate is 1/8, which means how long does it take her to paint one fence by herself? 8 hours. She actually has the same rate as Ben. Okay, so that's solving rational word problems. Translating them into time, task over time, so you can compare them, because Ben does it in 8 hours, Caleb does it in 4 hours. I need to have a way that I can compare them on the same level, per hour, almost like their speed, their rate. And this way, once they're all represented by rates, you can add and subtract rates together when people work together, or different things like that. And that's usually the best way to solve these. But then also make sure that your answer makes sense in the context of the problem. Ben can do it in 8 hours, Caleb can do it in 4 hours. Working together, if I'm getting an answer larger than 4, that doesn't really make sense. Because if Caleb can do it by himself in 4 hours, with help, he should finish the job quicker. 2 hours, 40 minutes makes sense based in the problem. An answer of 3/8, which is, not quite there yet, maybe doesn't make sense. Or if I did the problem wrong and got 12, again, that wouldn't really make sense. So make sure your answer makes sense to the problem. And the same thing here, it took 2 hours, 40 minutes for Ben and Caleb. Now that Katie's helping, it's down to 2 hours. So she's cutting 40 minutes off the time, so she's not cutting a tremendous amount of time, but she's cutting a reasonable amount of time. So a rate comparative to Ben's kind of makes sense. So make sure your answers make sense. It's always good idea to reread the question, once you have your answer, and kind of ask yourself, does my answer make sense? All right, see you.